Snow fell gently against the broad windows of Alexander Hart's Boston penthouse office, dusting the rooftops with a fragile, glimmering layer of white. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and the sharp tang of paper, a mixture of past memories and present control. Alexander stood alone before the roaring fireplace, a stack of envelopes in his hand, each one carefully tied with ribbons now fraying with age. He held one between his fingers, watching the curl of its edges soften in the heat. "Who leaves letters in a building no one enters?" he murmured, voice low and restrained, almost a whisper lost to the crackle of the fire. His gaze drifted over the room, lingering on the shadows cast by the flickering flames, the silhouettes of shelves lined with forgotten books and awards, each a silent testament to a life meticulously managed and fiercely contained. With deliberate motion, he fed the envelope into the fire. The paper caught quickly, flames licking the surface until only ash remained, and he inhaled deeply, a controlled exhale that betrayed a subtle tremor of restrained emotion. Another letter followed, then another, until the stack was nearly gone, a trail of burnt edges and curling smoke rising toward the vaulted ceiling. The act was ritualistic, almost ceremonial, a cleansing of sentiment he had long deemed dangerous and irrelevant. Yet his fingers paused mid-motion as one envelope, smaller and softer than the rest, fell from the pile and slid across the polished oak desk. He bent, retrieving it, noting the unfamiliar handwriting and the delicate curve of the inked letters. His eyes narrowed, tension coiling in the line of his jaw, the slightest clench betraying curiosity he refused to name. Outside, the city seemed hushed beneath the snow, streetlights casting halos through the flakes, mirrored faintly in the glossy surface of his desk. The room felt smaller, quieter, filled with the weight of anticipation and unspoken possibility. He turned the envelope over in his hand, feeling the grain of the paper, a subtle thrum of something that pulled against his meticulous control. The firelight reflected in his sharp, calculating eyes, creating brief glimpses of an inner turbulence kept hidden from the world. Every muscle was taut, every breath measured, yet beneath the surface, a flicker of something unacknowledged stirred. His mind raced with questions, unbidden and insistent, yet he remained silent, letting the smoke curl upward as though it might carry the answers for him. The letters that burned before had been easy to destroy, safe, contained, expected. This one was different. It demanded attention, curiosity edging into apprehension. He held it closer, the warmth of the fire brushing against his hands, the soft crackle punctuating the heavy stillness. Shadows stretched across the floor, dark ribbons dancing with the firelight, mirroring the conflict within him. The need to destroy versus the compulsion to read, to understand, to confront the unknown emotion carefully pressed into the paper. His chest rose and fell, silently, deliberately, while the room seemed to constrict around the growing tension. The envelope whispered possibilities he had spent years shutting out, yet the pull was undeniable, magnetic, almost dangerous. He set it on the edge of the desk, brushing a fingertip across the surface as though testing the weight of what it carried, and stepped back, eyes never leaving it. The fire hissed, sending tiny sparks upward, shadows dancing along the walls. He straightened, adjusting the cuff of his dark suit, yet the silence between him and the envelope stretched, pregnant with anticipation. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, obscuring the city in a white haze, mirroring the opaque swirl of his thoughts. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Alexander Hart understood that this letter was no ordinary message. It was a key, a provocation, a hint of something irreversibly about to change. The camera would linger here, over his tense profile, the glowing embers, the small but undeniable curl of the envelope's paper, leaving the audience breathless and suspended, curiosity fully ignited, waiting for the next movement that would bridge this moment into a story unfolding far beyond the fireplace, beyond the office, beyond the snow and the night itself. Claire Monroe's steps echoed softly against the polished floors of the Boston penthouse, carrying a rhythmic certainty that contrasted with the chaotic swirl of snow outside. The late afternoon light, muted and gray, spilled across the office through the broad windows, painting long fractured shadows along the walls. She carried the archival folder carefully, her hands brushing the smooth leather of the desk as she stepped closer, conscious of the weight of the room and the solitary figure within it. "Mr. Hart? I have the letters for you and one belongs to me," she said, voice measured, calm, yet laced with an undercurrent of anxiety. Alexander did not move immediately. The air between them thickened, heavy with expectation and the unspoken question of why this young archivist had arrived, interrupting the precise ritual of his afternoon. His eyes, sharp and discerning, tracked her every movement as she approached, each step deliberate, each breath a subtle defiance against the tension that had taken root. The snow outside pressed against the glass like a silent witness, and the muffled hum of city life below seemed distant, inconsequential, drowned by the quiet intensity of the office. She set the folder down carefully, the sound of it meeting the desk resonating in the space, a small yet significant punctuation in the thickening atmosphere. Alexander's hands flexed slightly at his sides, the faintest tightening of fingers betraying the careful control of a man accustomed to command in solitude. The envelope she had mentioned remained in the pile, distinct, its unfamiliar handwriting curling in delicate strokes. For a long moment neither spoke, the silence stretching taut as the soft crackle of the fireplace punctuated the quiet. His gaze lingered on her face, noting the calm determination, the steadiness in her posture, the subtle tension in her shoulders, and the way she met his eyes without flinching. It was a look that did not seek approval, did not plead, yet demanded acknowledgement, a small but insistent claim upon the space she now shared with him. Outside, the wind drove snow against the windows, the flakes scattering in shifting patterns that mirrored the unease in the room, each drift a subtle reflection of curiosity and apprehension. He finally moved, a deliberate, measured step toward the desk, eyes narrowing slightly as he reached for the top envelope, brushing against the one she had set aside. The motion was precise, controlled, yet a silent question hung between them. Why had she risked this intrusion, and what did the contents of this letter mean in a world where he had destroyed every other message of affection long ago? Claire's hands hovered momentarily, not withdrawing but neither asserting, maintaining a careful balance between presence and respect, the air between them charged with quiet anticipation. His breath shifted, subtle and almost imperceptible, as the shadows of the room deepened, folding around the two of them like a slow, enveloping curtain. The tension was cinematic, visual, palpable, her calm fortitude against his taut, precise control, the firelight dancing across both of their features, casting half their faces in shadow. Every movement, every glance was layered with subtext, the room itself a stage for the unspoken dynamics unfolding. The envelope remained at the center, a tangible symbol of curiosity and potential, and Alexander's gaze did not waver from it, nor from her, even as the silence stretched, heavy, full of anticipation, unresolved emotion, and the subtle, burgeoning possibility that one letter might fracture the walls he had built around his heart. And in that suspended moment, as the snow fell softly and the office held its breath, the story poised delicately on the brink of discovery, both Alexander and Claire felt the weight of what was to come, the first pulse of connection, and the magnetic tension that promised inevitable collision in the next chapter. The snowstorm intensified outside, wind gusting against the broad office windows with a sharp, urgent rhythm that pressed against the silence inside. Alexander Hart stood rigid near the desk, the envelope in his hand now trembling slightly, an imperceptible sign of curiosity and restraint colliding. Claire Monroe's eyes darted toward the windows, noting the sharp shadows of swirling snowflakes, and the way the gray light fractured across the polished floor. "You shouldn't be here when the storm hits," Alexander said quietly, voice low and measured, carrying both command and an unusual note of concern that pulled Claire's attention fully to him. The room seemed smaller, the space between them thick with anticipation, and the unspoken question of proximity. Claire shifted, adjusting the folder in her hands, feeling the weight of both the letters and the charged air. Yet she did not retreat. Her presence was deliberate, calm, steady, an unspoken counterbalance to the taut control in his posture. Outside, the storm rattled the city streets, snow accumulating in sudden drifts against the glass, a quiet reminder that the world beyond the office had no sway here. The room belonged entirely to the two of them, and the tension vibrated through every polished surface. Alexander moved a slow, deliberate step toward the fireplace, then another toward the desk, his eyes never leaving hers, calculating, restrained, unreadable. Claire's breath caught, not in fear, but in awareness of the weight her presence carried, the way it challenged his carefully maintained solitude. She placed the folder down with a soft but deliberate motion, the sound punctuating the silence, the edge of the paper curling slightly from the fire's heat, signaling both fragility and endurance. He watched her hands hover, and the brief pause in motion created a space dense with expectation, the unspoken possibility that a single gesture might shift the equilibrium between them. The storm outside intensified, rattling the windows, sending small cascades of snowflakes against the glass panes, each flutter a visual echo of the subtle charge in the room. Alexander's hand brushed the envelope instinctively, almost tenderly, and he exhaled slowly, the movement of his chest catching the dim light in a way that revealed more than he intended, a flicker of vulnerability beneath his composed exterior. Claire noticed, her eyes tracing the slight tension in his jaw, the measured inhale, the faint tremor in his fingers as he returned the envelope to the top of the desk, and her chest responded with a quiet, unarticulated recognition. He was watching her as carefully as she had been watching him. The firelight danced across the surfaces, highlighting shadows that stretched and contracted like living things, weaving the storm outside into the charged intimacy of the office. Each movement, his shifting weight, her slight step closer, the careful placement of the folder, was layered with subtext, the room a stage for tension unbroken, anticipation mounting. The snow muted the distant city hum, leaving only the delicate crackle of the fireplace, the subtle scrape of paper, and the soft breath of two people suspended in an unsaid exchange. Every glance, every motion hinted at the potential collision of curiosity and control, the magnetism between guarded restraint and deliberate calm. As the wind whipped against the windows and the snow piled high against the frames, Alexander's eyes lingered on the envelope one last time, then up at Claire, the silence between them both protective and accusing, intimate yet charged with hesitation, leaving the story suspended, unresolved, the next movement inevitable, the audience held in quiet, cinematic anticipation for what would unfold when the storm, and their proximity, forced the boundaries of control to shift. The storm outside softened to a gentle whisper of snow drifting across the city streets, pale light spilling through the tall windows of Alexander Hart's penthouse. Inside, the office had transformed into a cocoon of muted warmth, shadows flickering against polished wood and leather as the fireplace burned low, casting elongated shapes across the walls. Claire Monroe remained near the desk, hands lightly touching the archival folder, her fingers tracing the edge of the envelope she had placed there, almost as if measuring the invisible tension it carried. Alexander watched her, a subtle shift in his posture revealing the first cracks in his meticulously maintained reserve. "You handle things differently than anyone else here," he said quietly, voice low, almost reluctant, yet carrying the weight of sincere observation. His words lingered in the air between them, filled with both acknowledgement and the unspoken question of trust. Claire's eyes flicked up, meeting his gaze with the soft steadiness that had drawn him into the room hours before, yet she said nothing, letting the silence convey her calm composure and quiet confidence. Outside, the city glimmered faintly beneath a blanket of snow, streetlights reflecting on slick roads, the sound of distant traffic muted by the winter hush, creating an intimate, cinematic frame that enclosed them both in the room. Alexander's hands flexed at his sides, a subtle tremor passing through the fingers as he moved closer, his steps deliberate, controlled, and precise. The envelope lay between them, its presence magnetic, a bridge between guarded walls and latent curiosity. As he approached, the firelight danced across his features, revealing an almost imperceptible softness in the sharp angles of his jaw, and the intensity in his silver-gray eyes. Claire's breath caught, subtle and measured, as she noted the faint tremor in his hand, the quiet hesitation in the line of his stance, and the way he studied her with a focus that seemed both penetrating and uncertain. The room's air was thick with a tension that was both restrained and electric, a slow crescendo of emotion that neither dared break. Alexander bent slightly, adjusting a stack of papers with a motion that was careful yet deliberate, the smallest gesture communicating a fragile vulnerability. Claire's eyes followed the movement, reading the subtle cues in his posture, the way his shoulders shifted, the slight exhale that passed through his chest, details she recognized not as weakness, but as a window into the man behind the controlled exterior. Each breath, each micro-movement, the soft crackle of the fire, and the faint hiss of the city beyond the glass worked together to heighten the tension, crafting a visual and emotional landscape that felt suspended in time. They moved in quiet choreography, neither asserting dominance nor surrendering, each aware of the charged space between them, the invisible lines drawn by curiosity, respect, and the unspoken weight of the letter that connected them. Alexander's eyes lingered on Claire, noting the steadiness in her gaze, the gentle composure of her hands resting on the folder, and the way the firelight caught her hair, creating a halo effect that seemed to illuminate her resolve and calm confidence. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence heavy yet intimate, filled with the potential for revelation and connection. Outside, snow continued to drift against the windows, coating the city in white, mirroring the soft, suspended uncertainty that hung between them, leaving both Alexander and Claire poised at the brink of discovery, curiosity, and the tentative acknowledgement of something neither could yet define but both could feel, the quiet tension lingering unresolved, drawing the narrative inexorably toward the next encounter, and the unfolding of trust and intimacy. The late afternoon sun cast a muted glow through the frost-covered windows of Alexander Hart's Boston penthouse, the snow outside now a thin, sparkling layer over the city rooftops. Inside, the office smelled faintly of polished oak and the lingering smoke of the fireplace, a comfortable warmth that contrasted with the chill beyond the glass. Claire Monroe moved with quiet purpose, arranging the archival folders with deliberate precision, her hands steady, her posture composed. Alexander observed her from across the room, the subtle way her shoulders straightened when she focused, the faint crease of concentration between her brows, the meticulous care in her movements. "I have never seen anyone fight so quietly for what is right," he said, voice low, measured, almost hesitant, carrying a note of admiration he did not offer lightly. Claire paused, glancing at him with a soft, acknowledging smile, her eyes calm, steady, and unflinching, conveying a silent understanding rather than seeking validation. The snow outside caught the last glimmers of daylight, casting fragmented light across the office floor, reflecting in the polished surfaces and creating a cinematic play of shadows around them. Alexander stepped closer, the faint echo of his shoes against the hardwood floor marking the slow, deliberate approach that mirrored the shift in his perception, the subtle change in the distance he kept from her until now. The envelope remained on the desk between them, a constant reminder of the tension that had built over the hours, but his attention lingered on her quiet composure, the way her fingers traced the edges of the folder, the slight inhale that accompanied her deliberate movements. Each motion she made became a study in grace and competence, the kind of presence that demanded recognition without assertion, a calm power that unsettled the meticulous control he had maintained over his space and life. The office felt charged, the atmosphere dense with the unspoken acknowledgement of her influence, the gentle but undeniable pull of respect and admiration growing between them. Alexander's fingers brushed the edge of the envelope absent-mindedly, a subtle gesture betraying his focus shifting from the physical to the emotional, tracing a line from curiosity to the quiet admiration budding in the contours of his restraint. Claire, noting the shift, did not comment, her silence speaking volumes, her body language steady yet aware, a slight lean toward the desk subtly signaling engagement without intrusion. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows across their faces, highlighting the small, intimate details. The way his jaw softened in the moment of observation, the way her eyes reflected the amber glow, catching nuances in expression that might have gone unnoticed in a brighter, more exposed setting. The city beyond the glass remained muted and distant, the snow dampening sound and movement, creating a private, cinematic stage where the dynamics between them could unfold with subtlety and nuance. Alexander exhaled softly, a deliberate, controlled breath, and for the first time in hours, allowed his gaze to linger fully on her without distraction or internal guard. The tension between them had shifted, layered now with a quiet admiration, a recognition of capability and integrity that went beyond the letter, beyond the storm, beyond the enforced proximity. Yet the envelope, the snow outside, and the encroaching night kept the moment suspended, unresolved, carrying a silent promise of the deeper emotional revelations and challenges that would unfold in the next chapter, leaving the audience captivated, poised on the precipice of anticipation and longing. The office was quieter now, the city lights dimmed behind the frost-coated windows, a muted backdrop to the subtle storm that still lingered outside. Alexander Hart's gaze remained fixed on the polished surface of the desk, the envelope resting between them like a fragile talisman of curiosity and restraint. Claire Monroe moved to adjust a stack of files, but the small scrape of paper against polished wood seemed amplified in the heavy atmosphere, a reminder that proximity carried weight, unspoken yet palpable. I cannot let anyone know what I feel, Alexander murmured, voice low, restrained, yet threaded with a rare vulnerability that neither sought explanation nor apology. His words hung in the air, pressing against the stillness, as if testing whether it could hold the tension without shattering. Claire paused, her eyes lifting to meet his, steady and composed, yet reflective of the weight she sensed pressing beneath his control. The faint creak of the floorboards beneath her feet echoed softly, a quiet punctuation to the suspended space between them. Outside, the wind rattled the windows lightly, snowflakes striking the glass in shifting patterns, a visual echo of the turbulence coiled within the room. Alexander shifted his weight, the precise motion deliberate, calculated, yet carrying an almost imperceptible tremor as if the words he had spoken were more difficult than any command he had ever issued. Claire noticed, subtle but attentive, the way his jaw clenched and released, the tight inhale through his chest, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes, all signs of the emotional conflict he had long kept hidden. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the surfaces of the office, highlighting the faint tremor of his fingers as they brushed the envelope absent-mindedly. Each movement between them became a silent negotiation of control, curiosity, and restraint, the air dense with emotion neither fully revealed nor denied. Claire stepped slightly closer, not encroaching but bridging a subtle distance, the soft fabric of her sleeves brushing against the edge of the desk, the scent of her presence, a mixture of winter citrus from a candle and faint warmth, drawing his attention in ways he had not anticipated. The snow outside continued to drift, muffling the distant hum of the city, heightening the isolation of the space and the intensity of their shared proximity. Alexander's gaze lingered on her hands as they hovered near the folder, the careful precision of her movements a quiet counterpoint to his taut control, her steadiness challenging his need for measured authority, while offering an unspoken invitation to trust. The envelope, the faint warmth of the fire, the muted snow, and the quiet tension coalesced into a suspended moment of connection, both fragile and charged. His fingers brushed it again, hesitated, and then drew back, a silent acknowledgement of his own restraint and the danger of unspoken feelings, while her eyes remained fixed on him, calm yet probing, reflecting curiosity and recognition. The room held its breath with them, shadows stretching and flickering as if in rhythm with the unspoken dialogue. Every micro-movement amplified, every breath counted, leaving both Alexander and Claire poised on the edge of revelation, their proximity now a delicate balance of admiration, restraint, and unacknowledged longing, the tension unresolved, cinematic, and pregnant with the promise of deeper emotional exposure in the hours to come. The evening had settled over Boston like a soft, silvery veil, snow drifting lightly against the tall windows, reflecting the faint glow of streetlights below. Alexander Hart stood by the desk, his posture slightly less rigid than before, shoulders easing as if the weight of the day had been redistributed. Claire Monroe remained near the archival folders, her hands brushing the edges with deliberate care, yet her eyes followed him with quiet attentiveness, reading the subtle shifts in his expression, the micro-gestures that betrayed the tension beneath his composed exterior. "You do not have to carry it alone," he said softly, voice low, restrained, yet imbued with a sincerity that pulled at the edges of the barrier he had maintained for so long. The words hung between them, buoyed by the flickering firelight and the quiet patter of snow against the glass, carrying the weight of admission without demanding reciprocation. Claire's gaze lifted, slow and deliberate, meeting his eyes with a measured acknowledgement, her expression calm yet aware of the vulnerability threading through his tone. The city beyond the windows was muted, the snow muffling distant traffic, creating an intimate theater in which the smallest movements carried amplified significance. Alexander's fingers brushed over the envelope on the desk, hesitant, as if reaching for something larger than its paper confines, the firelight catching the subtle tremor in his hand. Claire noted the motion, the faint exhale, the way his gaze softened ever so slightly as it lingered on her, and she felt a quiet shift in the energy between them, the balance tilting toward trust, toward acknowledgement, toward connection. He moved closer, each step deliberate, the polished hardwood beneath his shoes carrying the weight of silent decision, and paused just beyond the edge of her personal space, leaving room for choice while asserting presence. Claire's hands remained poised, her posture steady, yet her awareness of him pressed against the edges of her concentration, a magnetic pull that she neither resisted nor sought to control. The firelight flickered across his features, illuminating the subtle relaxation in his jaw, the brief softening around his eyes, the imperceptible inhale that carried a hint of something unspoken, almost confessed. Shadows stretched and shifted across the room, dancing over the desk, the stacks of folders, and the space between them, creating a visual rhythm that mirrored the tentative heartbeat of emotional breakthrough. Alexander extended a hand, not touching yet, hovering in deliberate hesitation, a silent invitation framed by restraint and care. Claire's eyes followed, reading intention in the measured pause, the unspoken question woven through the tension. Whether she would respond to the unvoiced offering, whether trust